Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Giallo enthusiasts. This is Tanner Leeser, your host for all things Giallo, here on The King in Giallo. Our next stop on our journey through Giallo cinema is the fourth Giallo film from Mario Bava, Hatchet for the Honeymoon, released in 1970. In this video, I will do a deep dive overview, then segue into a full review and GialliTally. The overview will be spoiler-free, the review and GialliTally will not. Here is Hatchet for the Honeymoon overview. Hatchet for the Honeymoon, sometimes seen as Blood Brides or Red Wedding Night in some English variant releases, is an Italian and Spanish co-production. The film is directed by Mario Bava and written by Santiago Moncado. Music is by Sante Romatelli. The cast for the film is comprised of Stephen Forsythe as John Harrington, Laura Betty as Mildred Harrington, Dagmar Lassender as Helen Wood, Jesus Puente as Inspector Russell, Femi Benusi as Alice Norton, Gerard Tisci as Dr. Calloway, and Luciano Pigozzi as Vences. The plot centers on John Harrington, a handsome and rich young man with a thriving business as a bridal designer. Despite seemingly having everything in life, John is also something of a sadistic murderer, which is not good for the young women of Paris. The ones getting married, that is. The ire of John, his spark of insanity, is caused by the sight of women in wedding dresses, which, depending on how you see things, is either very convenient or very inconvenient for him, considering that his salon specializes in wedding attire. But John, you see, is not just totally batshit crazy. Actually, he continues his deranged killings because he hopes that eventually he will unlock the morbid secret behind his fixation, a repressed memory which is tied to some sort of childhood trauma that has pervaded his entire life into adulthood. John's situation becomes more complicated after he begins to fall for his latest prospect, Helen Wood, his next victim. However, Mildred, John's overbearing and controlling wife, looms in his way. I have covered how Giallo typically as a genre of film has certain tropes and styles which it adheres to, either strongly at the hip or distantly, while at the same time remains open enough that the formula can be broken or played around with, so long as a few of the elements are left intact. Hatchet for the Honeymoon seems to be one of these explorations of what the genre can be. The film opens with the protagonist committing a double murder on a train of some newlyweds on their wedding night. Bava does something here he's never done in his thrillers before this point, and that is usage of subjective camera work, which asks the audience to try to identify with this lunatic. The technique employed here by the grandfather of Italian horror is utilized to perfection, to the point that its imitation and duplication in Giallo cinema was both guaranteed and unavoidable. Argento was one of the few directors to translate the stylistic technique as effectively in his gialli, but regardless, over the next few years, this method would become an overworked cliché. The sequence is brought to an end by a cut to an obvious model train, which is then grabbed by an off-screen hand before the camera pulls back to reveal John at play with a train set. Bava fans will recognize the similarities of this to the original ending scene in The Three Faces of Fear, 1963, aka Black Sabbath, where the camera pulls back to reveal the actor on a fake horse being rocked by film technicians, who simultaneously move objects past him while cycling a moving backdrop image to give the illusion of a man riding a horse and traversing at great speeds. Both instances, in Howarth's words, quote, brashly confront the simplicity of cinematic illusion. Funny enough, this train gag was previously done by Bava in his sex comedy 4 Times That Night, which was filmed in 1969, but delayed until its release in 1972. The film quickly engages the audience with the plot of the story and how we will be following the madman throughout the film's duration through the usage of voiceover narrations by John, who goes on to explain how he has already murdered 5 women, plus the fact that he is haunted by a repressed childhood memory of the death of his beloved mother. But you see, every time he kills another young woman, he remembers a little bit more. The story seems to blend ingredients from Psycho, 1960, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, with some of the elements found in the proto-giallo Libido, 1965, directed by Ernesto Gastaldi and Vittorio Salerno. The character in these opening moments visually displays a duplicitous nature which teeters between his good looks, his attention to detail in regards to his appearance and dress, arrogant self-centeredness, against his violent and animalistic tendencies to kill. Keeping with Psycho, the character of John is implied to be impotent and thus the act of killing replaces the act of sex for him. Some thrillers might have the impotence alone as the catalyst to violence, but in this film, it is just another force which compels him to act. John is caught up in his overwhelming need to remember the traumatic truth, which, ironically, this obsession is the thing which likely leaves him impotent in the first place, and his need to kill, which does serve as a form of orgasmic release for him, only pushes him deeper into a dark perversion whereby he may never return from. This analysis is made easier by an early scene where John retires into his study to examine mannequins in bridal attire, only for him to withdraw a cleaver and clutch it in a masturbatory fashion, which might be said overdoes the symbolism behind the violence acting as a form of sexual gratification. Hatchet for the Honeymoon, in typical Bava fashion, is a bit of an oddity in terms of giallo cinema, and some sticklers may say that because there is no mystery, that is not a giallo, and while I understand that, here's why I say sometimes with this genre, one needs to have an open mind and broaden their horizons a bit. I will say, if this movie came out over a decade later, it would probably certainly be a slasher film. To the credit of the film and to Bava, the fact that the film does not rely on the mystery of who the killer is, and thereby a big surprise reveal, is that you can watch this movie again without having lost the magic of the first time viewing, where you are trying to solve the mystery. This is something that many gialli who solely focus on the mystery might have against them if their scripts are not written to perfection. The fact that all of the gusto is within that first viewing alone. Granted, some gialli don't need to worry about this, they are rewatchable regardless. However, the film employs one more no-no in regards to giallo cinema, and that is the inclusion of the supernatural. After John kills off someone, their ghost is seen by everybody except John, until later in the film where this reverses and John becomes the only one who can see the apparition. To the film's credit, it does use this element in a way that showcases the progressive deterioration of the protagonist's mental state. I'll say, I will give a giallo film a lot of slack for things like lack of a mystery and inclusion of supernatural events, so long as the film goes the route of exploring a character who is going off the deep end, because regardless of whether the supernatural elements are played for reality or not, the film behaving as a psychological thriller is a common enough giallo route. This film includes elements of film which would be seen later on in Tourist Trap 1979, The Shining 1980 by Stanley Kubrick, and Maniac 1980. Stephen Forsyth, a Canadian model turned actor, plays John. Forsyth was seen in the 1967 spaghetti western Death at Owl Rock by Riccardo Freda and the 1968 film Black Jesus by Valerio Zolini. Forsyth nails the role in Hatchet for the Honeymoon, and while some may take issue with the performance, the superficiality of the character actually reads pretty well, and seems to have been a deliberate decision by Bava and Forsyth. Interestingly enough, Forsyth mentioned how Bava hardly gave him any direction at all, but would just smile and tell him that if he was doing anything wrong, Bava would let him know. Laura Betty, who plays the wife, Mildred, was an actor in numerous of the films of Pier Paolo Pasolini, including Teorema, 1968, where she had netted a Coppa Volpi Prize for her portrayal of the maid. She would go on to appear in Bava's next film, Twitch of the Death Nerve, aka A Bay of Blood, 1971. Betty had reached out to Bava wanting to work with him, and he was beyond thrilled to have her involved, but when he realized that her part would be insubstantial, and because the love interest role was already cast, Bava rewrote parts of the script so Laura Betty would have a bigger part, which, by the way, infuriated Dagmar Lassander on set, who lost 25 pounds for the role, only for her character to be sidelined by a rewrite and wholly new character. Lassander eventually sued Manuel Caño Sancheriaco, the producer, and her lover at the time. Spanish actor Jesus Puente has the distinction of elevating the cop in a Bava film to something actually verging on a three-dimensional human. Dagmar Lassander and Femi Benussi, soon to be idols of Eurocult cinema sex appeal, add some sexiness to the picture, but unfortunately the script doesn't allow for much else. Dagmar would later appear in the Luciano Ercoli Giallo, The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, 1970, previously covered here on the channel. Before these roles, she was in Frightened Woman, 1969 by Piero Schivazzappa. In the next decade, she would appear in the Lucio Fulci films The Black Cat and The House by the Cemetery, both 1981. Fun facts: this was Bava's cheapest film, and because of this, most of his special effects were done in camera and with the help of either quickly adjusting the focus or using distorted lenses. Principal photography began in 1968, and exterior shots of the Harrington household were done at the villa of the 20th century Spanish fascist dictator Francisco Franco, and armed guards were present to ensure that nobody did film upstairs or damage the floor or any of the furnishings with the fake blood. They decided to film a portion in Paris, and a second unit crew was created and led by Bava's son, Lamberto. But at this time, the film was already over budget, and Forsythe had not been paid for 2 weeks, so he refused to be on camera in these new scenes until he was paid. They ended up using a body double to capture these scenes, which ultimately ended up on the editing room floor. The film halted production due to having no money, and Bava was hired by American producer Dick Randall to direct the film 4 times that night. Bava tried to get Randall to finance the remainder of the film, but he was uninterested. Canio did secure the rest of the funds needed, and the film wrapped production in late 1969. The film then premiered on June 2nd, 1970. The internal monologues of Patrick Bateman in American Psycho, 2000, are directly inspired by this film's usage of monologues. But I digress. On to the review. Spoilers ahead for those of you who haven't yet seen the film. You've been warned. My prediction for the movie's GialliTally score. At the time of writing this, I have not seen anything from the movie. Despite picking up the Blu-ray several months ago, I have waited until doing this video on the channel to watch it. I only have a vague idea of what it is about, so I will say between 375 to 425 points. Well, let's begin the GialliTally and review portion of the video, beginning as always with the pre-viewing cliches. The repeat offenders are 1 point for actor, 3 for writer, 3 for composer, and 5 for director. Jesus Puente was in Perversion Story, 1 point. Femi Benussi was in Deadly Inheritance, 1 point. Luciano Pigozzi was in Naked You Die, Libido, and Blood and Black Lace, 3 points. Santa Maria Romatelli composed for Top Sensation, 3 points. Mario Bava directed $5 for an August Moon, Blood and Black Lace, The Telephone, and The Girl Who Knew Too Much, 20 points. Cliché points for the title, Hatchet for the Honeymoon. Nothing fits my criteria, unfortunately. No points. First look, we have 25 points for the Italian director, and an additional 15 points for the movie releasing during the golden age of giallo cinema. And would you look at that, it is already Pilato o'clock. The film opens with a gorgeous opening title sequence. I gotta hand it to Bava. He doesn't typically just start his movies. There's always some sort of opening. Very cinematic. The movie then begins with a rushing train. Close up on a door handle or someone creeping through an ajar door, 5 points. This man creeping through the train is John, our main guy. C is for children, 5 points. Well, if the first AZ cliche is C and it's within the first minute of the movie, you can probably bet we're either dealing with a childhood trauma or a kitty killer. Let's watch. John immediately begins having flashbacks. He stares at the child's face through a reflection. Damn movie, getting this out of the way real fast. Everybody. Symbolism. I'll also add mirror being used beyond its natural purpose, 2 points. There's actually more of that happens later in the movie. I love how John looks disappointed in himself as he turns away and unlocks the cabin door, and the child likewise just looks disappointed. Nice touch. Inside, we find some bridal wear set down, and 2 newlyweds, consummating their union. John raises the hatchet for their honeymoon. Oh no, excuse me, that's a cleaver. Movie. The murder is cut short with interspersions of the train, more flashbacks, and wonderful camera visuals. As I already stated in the overview, Bava did this technique because the budget could not afford more gore effects for the kills. And I think what Bava does instead of just people being off-screen to death is pure genius. Why not lean hard into the psychological aspect of the movie? Moving on. The kill sequence has a couple more instances of the same flashback with a motherly voice saying, John. John. John wipes the blade clean. Unfortunately for the film, my K is for knives does not include other weapons. John sets a do not disturb sign on the cabin door and exits. Cut to what appears to be the train scene from King Kong vs. Godzilla. John is home. As he shaves, he begins to narrate.
My name is John Harrington. I'm 30 years old. I am a paranoiac. Paranoiac, an enchanting word, so civilized and full of possibilities. The fact is, I am completely mad.
They think I'm insane. They're the ones who are insane.
Nobody suspects that I am a madman, a dangerous murderer. Not Mildred, my wife, nor the employees of my fashion center, nor, of course, my customers.
Z is for zoom, 5 points. E is for eyeballs, 5 points. It's funny how not only does American Psycho take these narration sequences, but also the character's routine of pampering himself while doing it.
My name is Patrick Bateman. I'm 27 years old. I believe in taking care of myself, in a balanced diet and a rigorous exercise routine. In the morning, if my face is a little puffy, I'll put on an ice pack while doing my stomach crunches. I can do 1,000 now.
Animals featured, a fly, and birds. 2 points. He rescues the fly only to feed it to one of his many birds. Animals killed. Add 3 more points, for a total of 5 for animals. Well, that was fast. John admits to killing 5 women already. No mention of the grooms, however. He goes on to mention that he is compelled to continue using the cleaver whenever he begins to hear the footsteps, and that he shall continue killing until he can discover the truth. He sits with his wife, Mildred, who is as insufferable as her name. No offense if your name is Mildred. The French speakers will notice a spelling error here. You know what? I like his wardrobe here. F is for fashion. Extra points for the character working in fashion. 10 points. John mentions the recent victim had already paid for her wedding gown, then goes on to ask his wife if she's considered his proposition. She says that she will never grant him a divorce. She emasculates him by saying everything in their operation works because of her and her money, but John reminds her that he's the one who inherited the business from his mother. Exposition dumping, 2 points. I'll also add up set in a manor or chateau. We're here for a fair amount. 5 points. She continues to berate him, calling him useless, and reasserts that she will never grant him a divorce. Never. She tells John that she is going to a seance tonight and that she wants him to join her. He quips about her trying to contact her first husband, prompting her to retort that at least while he was alive, he was a man. That's our subtle clue that John is impotent or has trouble performing the deed, so to speak. As John walks about the fashion house, he is watched by Femi Benusi playing Alice. Art featured, extra points for it being central to the plot, aka the modeling, 10 points. In walks another veteran of Giallo, Luciano Pigozzi, playing a very similar role to the one he played in Blood and Blacklace. John doesn't have any time to look at sketches. After striking a framed photo of his wife, he's approached by Dagmar Lassender, playing a prospective model named Helen. She says Rosie told her about this place and shows John her references. After a brief rundown of her measurements and the details of the job itself, Helen is hired to be a model. After letting her out, John retires to his secret room. In his lair are tens of mannequin models dressed in bridal wear, whom John clearly has an obsessive fancy towards. O is for obsession, extra points for the killer being obsessed, 10 points. John walks trance-like across the room where he unveils his cleaver. He wields it in a suggestive manner, hinting at the substitutive nature of the blade for his manhood. The scene transitions to the seance scene. Seance performed, 5 points. During the procedure, Mildred seems to become possessed, and she begins speaking to John in a different tone, as if she's a different person. That same motherly voice from before. She seems overcome by something, a vision perhaps. The entire scene disturbs John, who interrupts the ordeal. We cut to John in the hothouse with his plants. In walks Inspector Russell. We gather that he has been here several times in the past, likely because all the victims had been customers here, and that John is clearly the connection. The two discuss the plants, the hothouse, and the nature of one who cultivates. John tips his hand a bit, stating that the secret to his flowers is aided by the right fertilizer. Extra points for Z is for zoom, for a zoom on eyes, another 5 points. Inspector Russell brings up the 3 women found killed and 4 more missing, all in the last year. Well, John admitted to killing 5, so I'm not too certain of the other 2. John says perhaps the grooms are to blame. Russell asserts it must be a madman, but he can't figure out the motive. Russell questions John about the furnace, which John states is only used for burning leaves. Q is for questions, 5 points. Russell asks John about Rosie, who recently had worked there, but John changes the subject to his flowers. John adds that despite all the victims being newlyweds, Rosie was not getting married. The next scene shows some women modeling, which I already gave the extra points for F is for fashion and art featured, anticipating all these scenes already. The men ponder that perhaps Rosie went on a secret vacation. Alice and John have a strange stare down, not sure if she likes John or suspects him or what. Helen is introduced to the inspector as Rosie's replacement, which she adds that she's not going anywhere. Inspector Russell goes to leave, but
one other thing.
He mentions that he might be back, but he confirms with John that it is simply all routine. As John leaves, Alice rushes to talk to him. She states that she must be quitting soon because she is getting married. John asks her to stay after the other girls have left for the night. Later that night, they all leave except for Alice. As John waits, he sees the child again. H is for hallucinations, 5 points. Next, John is showing Alice his secret room full of the mannequins. He explains that he wanted to carry on his mother's work because he adored her. He tells her to choose whichever dress she likes for her big day, and it will be his wedding gift. They then kiss. I is for infidelity, 5 points. She chooses a dress, and John tells her to put it on. As she undresses in the background, John crosses over to the dwelling of his cleaver. He narrates again briefly.
A woman should live only until her wedding night. Love once, and then die.
Then pulls out the cleaver, and then grips it, suggestively. He opens a music box and approaches Alice, who poses like one of his mannequins. The two then dance together. John has another flashback and narrates about hearing those footsteps again. The vision ends with his mother's voice calling out. Things seem almost normal for a moment until Alice notices the cleaver. John stalks towards her and attacks. We view another strange and somewhat psychedelic sequence. As he kills, John remembers just a little bit more. He carries her body all the way over to the hothouse. At this point, he is practically dripping with sweat. He kisses the body. Gross. He places Alice in the furnace and closes it up. John then goes out to observe the plume of black smoke rising out from the chimney. The next day, John and Mildred are sitting out. She tells him that she will be leaving to visit her cousin who is sick. John doesn't object, which she calls out, knowing that he'll be thrilled to not have her around, but she promises him she will come back. Airplane, 2 points. After seeing his wife off, John is approached by Helen. She says she wants to spend time with him, and that night, the two hit the streets of Paris. Foreign locales, Paris, 5 points. And urban locales, 2 points. Helen toys with John, saying she could be there to entrap him, or that she could be the sister of Rosie, asking what he'd done with her, to which he says,
I killed her, raped her, and buried her in the hothouse.
In that order. She laughs, which kind of worries me.
Must have been marvelous.
She asks how many times he's been unfaithful to his wife, and he says that she asks a lot of questions, and that is the only thing she has in common with all women. He says she's different from other women, but can't put his finger on it exactly, guessing it may be her eyes, or her skin. While taking a walk, Helen lets it slip that she's had numerous lovers despite being 23 years old. John grabs her and asks, how many lovers? But Helen says she's never counted, but states not many. I'll say that's at least more than 5. She asks him why he's not happily married. John says apart from love, every man needs women for different reasons, and Helen asks what he needs them for. He says to learn something about himself. She says she could help him, but he says that he wouldn't want to use her in that way. I want to say, before the movie was rewritten to include the character of John's wife Mildred, which, granted, does become a well-fleshed out plot, I believe these types of scenes were the vein which this movie was following. You know, before most of Dagmar Lassender's scenes were cut. I'll mention more at the very end when I give my thoughts on the movie. In the car, John tells Helen that he doesn't want to harm her, but she asserts that she can take care of herself. He tries to drop her off, but she insists on asking another question. Why hasn't he kissed her yet? They smooch, and the scene cuts. Later at home that night, John pours himself some alcohol and lounges down for some late-night television. He is interrupted by something he notices upstairs. It seems that he's not alone. He investigates and finds Mildred home, sitting in bed reading. She laughs at him, stating she's not a ghost. She says that she took the first plane back. Mildred taunts him, calling him out for likely being with another woman, and she jokingly asks,
"Did you tell her how much you loved your mother?"
Fucking bitch.
He storms out, while through the door he can hear her yelling.
"I'll always be here at your side, whether you like it or not. Always. Always."
Y is for yelling, extra for it being a hysterical woman, 10 points. John runs the faucet but begins hearing those footsteps once again as the water begins to turn red with the help of some colored lights. Cut to John trying to reconnect with Mildred. He says they used to be happy, Mildred saying it was before they were married. He reminds her how they would laugh together and made plans and had dreams of their futures together. She laments that he was never her husband, implying they never consummated their marriage. John continues to sensually rub Mildred, who becomes visibly aroused. John confesses that things changed on their wedding night because he'd heard those footsteps for the first time, and though he knew that he should have done something then, he was too afraid. He begins to pull away, but she begs him not to leave her like this. He promises to be right back. John returns up the stairs with breakfast in bed for Mildred. I hope she likes Cleaver. Mildred freshens up with, I don't know, wild hyacinth? She turns and notices John in the doorway with the cleaver. Mildred retreats, fearing the inevitable. John levels with her. She will never leave him, and he doesn't want her around. This is the only solution.
Why? Why?
Quickly add extra points for Q is for questions for that being yelled. Another 5 points. John cleaves Mildred whilst wearing both lipstick and a wedding veil. Add up cross-dressing, 5 points. He misses and smashes the mirror. Mildred tries to run out of the room, but he catches up. Foot chase, 5 points. John cleaves his wife, which switches to another flashback, this time of a woman seemingly dying and calling out to him, the image of which is becoming clearer. Mildred, still alive, tries in vain to escape down the stairs. He stalks towards her, just as Mildred succumbs to her fate. John attacks unrelentingly. As she dies screaming, the doors rattle, pounding on the doors is heard, and the buzzer begins ringing. John descends the stairs to answer the door, wipes the lipstick off, and stows the veil in a hiding place. Evidence is seen being hidden, which I could have given for the bodies earlier. Forget it. 5 points. John opens the door and in storms Alice's fiancé, along with Inspector Russell. The man demands to know where Alice is. The two men assert to John that they no doubt heard a woman screaming moments ago. John more or less laughs off the claims, leads the men into the parlor, and turns the television on. Would you gentlemen like to watch Black Sabbath? I hear it's not bad. That Mario Bava is a splendid director. Truly one of a kind. John coincidentally turns on a horror movie, which, funny enough, is Bava's horror anthology movie, and it just so happens to be perfectly timed to be during a scene in the Virgil Act, which contains plenty of screaming. Mildred lies dying on the stairs. Extra points for Z is for a zoom on a dead or dying victim. 5 more points. The trio of men return to the foyer, where Russell begins his inquiry with John regarding Alice being the newest missing woman, who once again had association with his business, and was last seen on the premises. John is not playing the inspector's game, and practically dodges answering any of his questions. Russell tells Jimmy Kane that unless he makes a formal complaint against John, Russell's hands are tied legally. He refuses, and the two men leave, but Russell...
One more thing.
Columbo's John again.
It's very cold tonight, isn't it?
Yes, quite cold.
It's curious. You seem to be sweating. Very curious.
Bro, he knows it's you. John is burying Mildred in the back garden. He has another hallucination of the child, which I think we all can assume is him at this point. The boy says he saw Mommy killed. He recounts what he remembers happening that night. He awoke in bed, crossed the hall to his mother's room, then he asks,
Why did they kill Mommy? Who did it? I want to know who did it.
Another flashback showing the mother dying as a man lies dead next to her. W is for witness, 5 points. John is enjoying breakfast outside when he is startled by his wife's book opening itself and the pages fluttering. I'd say it's the wind, but the music stinger implies something more, perhaps. The maid walks over, but John declines any coffee, but the maid fills up a cup at the opposite end of the table. He asks her why she filled that cup, and she tells him that his wife asked for it. She leaves, but turns back, and we see that the maid can see Mildred sitting there across from her husband. When John looks over, he sees nothing.
I see nothing! I see nothing!
Supernatural elements, 2 points. While John tries to manage the fashion show for their bridal outfits, Mildred's apparition continues to be seen by others, but never John. Hey, that's the bitch who replaced my role in this movie. The fashion show is underway. The inspector is there, which is noticed by John. They talk. Russell makes a quip, all but accusing John of at least knowing something more than he's telling. He tells John that he'd made a call last night to the television studio, and no such scream had occurred in the movie leading up to the scene they saw in the parlor. Russell asks if John would like to know his plan for catching the killer. Sure. Patience. I gotta say, I love their relationship. It's not the first time I've watched scenes of an investigation where the inspector knows someone is guilty, yet they don't have sufficient evidence to arrest, but I cannot remember the last time the cat and mouse game was so entertaining. He leaves. John sits down to speak with this woman. After a moment, he asks why her mother is talking to herself, but she points out that she's not. She's talking with John's wife. That night, John begins calling out to Mildred. He loses it for a moment and collapses on the bed, breaking down in hysterics. The window bursts open, letting in a strong gale from outside. John notices his wife's book he just tossed across the room, now residing next to him. John suddenly sees his wife's spirit ascend the stairs from where she died. She tells him that she will never leave him, and everyone except for him will see her by his side.
By your side as always. Always, John. Always by your side. Always together. Always.
Today's secret word is
always.
First person POV of the killer, 5 points. It's not stalking, but it's something all right. It's implied that John dug up Mildred and cremated her remains and is now carrying around her ashes in this satchel. John talks to his dead wife, remarking that she'd wanted to be with him always, and he hopes this makes her happy finally. John does what any rational yet paranoid psychopath would do right now. He takes his wife's remains out clubbing. Gratuitous 1970s dancing, 2 points. A server approaches to take his order, and John jokingly asks the bag, his wife, what she would like, but the joke backfires when the server actually acknowledges an order from his wife. John rolls with it and toasts to her. John propositions a woman walking by, but she turns him down on the basis that he's with someone currently, but he says that she won't mind and that they will give her a show that she won't forget, even in hell. The woman slaps John, which humorously jolts Mildred. We hear the woman berating John for being a disgusting pervert. As a result, John is thrown out. He takes the satchel and tosses it into the river, but when he comes home triumphant at his actions, he is changelinged by the sight of the bag atop the stairs. Interestingly, this movie also predates that Peter Madoc film starring George C. Scott by 10 years. Just a coincidence. His wife's disembodied laughter echoes throughout the house. John retreats into his mannequin room. This is where I'd expect the film to go full tourist trap or maniac on us. He's grabbed by his wife. On the brink of madness, John goes out in a rainstorm and tosses out his wife's ashes. John is now attempting to lounge with all the trinkets and toys he's kept around. All of his toys are fully wound up and dancing about. In walks Helen. They speak briefly about his room of memories. Something happens to John and he warns Helen to get out, that he's at the end of a long road and there's only one step more to go. One by one, his toys cease their movements. John pulls Helen into his embrace and the two kiss. We cut to Inspector Russell racing across the city. Back with John, we get this sequence which truly scared the shit out of me. Whoa! That was creepy as fuck. John sees the child once more, Suddenly, a light appears upstairs, which scares John into hiding. Out from above walks Betsy, the woman John was sitting with during the fashion show. John has chosen her to be his final victim. But before he can commence with his heinous deed, the police burst in and John flees into the night. John is back home now, playing with his train set. He is interrupted by aggressive knocking and the buzzer being rung. He answers the door, and Russell storms in, admitting his surprise at finding John home. Russell begins to question John about his recent whereabouts, but Helen descends the stairs, saying that the two of them have been together all night. A is for alibi, 5 points. L is for lies, extra points for lying about the killer's alibi, 10 points. Russell, seemingly flushed with embarrassment, lets himself out, commenting how lucky John is. Russell,
Oh, one more thing.
Columbo's John yet again. Alone now, John asks Helen why she lied, prompting her to respond that she wanted Russell to get lost so she and John could spend some time together. He begs her to go away and leave him be, but she says she wants to stay. She begins kissing John just as he has glimpses of the cleaver. The two are having a romantic dance among the mannequins. They continue to kiss, but John persists with having flashbacks. The memory shows him, the little boy, finally reaching his mother's bedroom door and peering in through the keyhole. Helen snaps him back to reality. She smooches him, but John is more mannequin than man at this point. She begins dancing, and there's this admittedly odd bit where the music stinger erupts just as Helen freezes, and then we hear the background music she was dancing to stop. The order just feels off. John stands and approaches Helen, who behaves like a skittish dog, unsure if she's to be attacked or loved. He says he never wanted to harm her, but he must know the last piece and who did it. He swings the cleaver at Helen, but she blocks his initial attack. We cut to another flashback where John sees himself killing his mother. The horribly repressed memory was his own crime his subconscious was trying to bury. John, realizing what he had done, confesses aloud to killing his mother because he did not want her to marry again. S is for secrets. Sure, extra point for the killer having an impossible to predict motivation. 10 points. It's not that difficult, but the movie does a decent job keeping it secret. I'll grant hidden identity of the killer until the final moments for the reveal that John killed his mother. 5 points. I won't add witness misremembers something because he repressed the memory. Slightly different. Helen begins to back out of the room. She unlocks the door, and waiting on the other side is Russell with the police. I will not count her being rescued by a man because I think she actually handled herself very well in this situation. We cut to John being led into a bully van, or paddy wagon, or police van, depending on whichever term is used where you live. I find it humorous that John is getting that white boy police treatment. He's not being wrestled into the van in cuffs. He's allowed to walk himself in after he clearly got to change into some new clothes. John states that Helen was the pawn Russell had introduced. John says it could have been so nice, as if he didn't just try to murder her mere moments ago. John is led into the back of the van, and his satchel is brought in. When he looks off to his side, he sees Mildred sitting next to him, but now no one else can see her except John. Mildred says they will be together forever, first in the insane asylum, and then in hell. John goes mental and tries to escape the van, which he obviously cannot. Mildred laughs as she sifts through her own cremated ashes. The last shot shows John as a little boy outside, presumably the morning after he had killed his mother and stepfather. The end. And that's Hatchet for the honeymoon, or more appropriately, Cleaver for the honeymoon. Yo, I thought this movie was great. To me, this felt as if Psycho had a baby with libido. There is so much imagery which calls to later horror films such as Black Christmas, 1974, American Psycho, 2000, Tourist Trap, 1979, Maniac, 1980, The Shining, 1980, and The Changeling, 1980. The ghost plot is crazy for a giallo. As you may know through my video covering giallo cinema, a giallo typically may have supernatural elements, which is why we see psychic visions and seances, and ghosts are somewhat common, especially when dealing with a dead person who may or may not be dead, which is often brought on by a character's guilt or anguish. Don't be confused. The caveat of supernatural elements in giallo films is not that a giallo film should never contain them, it's that the supernatural should never be the driving force behind the plot. This is why Suspiria is not a traditional giallo in any sense, other than if you use the term giallo as a catch-all to describe Italian horror, which you shouldn't, and I would offer spaghetti horror. Suspiria, spoiler alert, is driven by a witch's coven who are perpetrating evil in the world. This is not a giallo which deals with real-world threats, but may also include a bit of the supernatural, especially if it is in the telling of a psychological downfall of a character. The thing that Hatchet does, which is a slight variation, but ultimately doesn't break this caveat rule, is the fact that other people can see Mildred's ghost. I don't think this breaks the rule, and it works towards further driving the character mad, which just works in a different way. So, I mentioned that the plot was rewritten after Bava agreed to cast Laura Betty so as to give her a more substantial role in the movie. The film we got, it's great, but the plot with his wife does feel a bit, how do I put it, out of place, sort of. Bava is kind of a genius at this sort of thing, and the plot with Mildred is explained away perfectly. The notion that the two had married, and on their wedding day, John's visions began, which fed into his impotence. But I think this plot is as if you have a White House and you installed a new deck patio, which isn't quite the same style as the original house, but you painted the deck white to blend in with the rest of the exterior. In this way, it matches everything, but it feels a bit out of place if you stare long enough. I wish we could see what the film would have looked like if Bava did not rewrite it to include a new character at the expense of writing out another. I feel like the few scenes of John and Helen together are what remained from the previous script and are the best insight as to what the film would have been like. At any rate, the final product is a great and unique giallo, and the ghost plot is a welcomed inclusion in my opinion. Certainly a fun one to check out. Let's segue to the GialliTally cliches for this movie. Post-Giallo viewing cliches. The reason for the killings. Psychological trauma, 7 points. The reason for the investigation. Police investigator, 2 points. Bonus points. The style bonus. This movie is stylistic as hell, and it is one of those wonderful examples of the styles working for the film, not just being flashy and stylistic for the sake of it. Bava always gives us zooms, crash zooms, focus racks both in and out, crazy camera effects, colored lights, the whole works. I think the style is incredible. Look at this reverse binocular shot, and it's not just for nothing. All these stylistic usages imply something deeper. I won't give it the full 25 points possible, but I will give it 24 points for its style bonus. Soundtrack. Indeed, 15 points. Bad effects. Bava knew he wouldn't be able to afford violent special effects, which is why the killings are all stylistic rather than graphically violent. Okay, the model train. Now, unlike in Double Face, where the model train is actually supposed to be a stand-in for a real train, this is really just supposed to be a toy. So no, this does not count as a bad effect. No bad effects, no points. Final look. Extra points. The Deadpool tallying how many kills and deaths are featured in the film. I break it down as thus: 10 points per kill or death scene for the main Deadpool, plus any stylistic kill multipliers, which we didn't add yet, plus the knife kill bonus, which there aren't any. We have John's stepfather, bludgeoned, 15 points. John's mother, Mrs. Harrington, bludgeoned, 15 points. Janvier, Rosie's husband, bludgeoned, 15 points. Rosie Miller, bludgeoned, 15 points. Alice Kane Norton, bludgeoned, 15 points. And Mildred Harrington, bludgeoned, 15 points. Extended Deadpool for those other deaths mentioned but not seen. I'll give 3 points for each. I'll be frank, this is difficult because the movie gives different numbers. John claims in the opening narration after the train murder that he has killed 5 women, 3 of whom are buried in the hothouse, who are named Carol, 3 points, Mary, 3 points, and Margaret, 3 points. Let's assume Rosie is one of these 5 female victims, so we are left with 1 unnamed female victim now. Unnamed female victim 1, 3 points. But Inspector Russell says that 3 women have been found dead, with 4 more still missing. I feel compelled to take John's word simply because I don't know why he would lie in a confessional narration about the number of his victims. This isn't the repairer of reputations. But this is troublesome. John admits 3 women are buried and thus will not be found. So that accounts for 3 out of the 4 missing women. But then we have 1 more missing woman, plus 2 other women John killed, which would mean 1 more woman was discovered killed according to Russell. Also, Russell doesn't say Rosie was found dead, only that she is now missing. I'm not going to give extra kills here. I'm going off of John's word that he has killed 5 women since beginning. Sorry, everybody. Red herrings for the total number of legitimate suspects in the film. 5 points per legit suspect are awarded. This may be a first, but we don't seem to have any red herrings because A, we know John is the killer, and B, regarding who killed his mother decades ago, there are no red herrings in the telling, other than John. Okay, so I guess John Harrington, 5 points. Flashback sequences, 5 points each. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, for a total of 45 points for flashbacks. Nudity, I award 5 points for ass, 7 for breasts, and 10 for genitalia. None. Ladies and gentlemen, for Hatchet for the Honeymoon, I award the film an AZ score of 13 out of 26. With the bonus points for these, we have a modified score total of 105 points. And for the full GialliTally score, I award Hatchet for the Honeymoon a GialliTally score of 445 points, compared to Perversion Story in first with 571 points. Hatchet for the Honeymoon is in 8th, far behind The Bird with the Crystal Plumage in second with 564 points, and $5 for an August Moon in third with 547 points. I predicted that the movie would end up getting around 375 to 425 points. I was just a little behind. I didn't really know what to expect and I didn't want to highball it, so I decided to play it safe and go a little lower. But like I've stated before, these points don't mean a movie is better or worse. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are horror fans or cinephiles. Subscribe to The King in Giallo if you haven't yet. And if you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comments section and I will get back to you. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook, and consider subscribing to my Patreon. Next time on The King in Giallo will be the Forgotten Giallo Films, Episode 16, 1970, Part 2, and then the overview, review, and GialliTally for the third Umberto Lenzi Giallo, A Quiet Place to Kill. Thank you very much for your continued support. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
I'd visit a doctor if I were you. You were sweating again in the cold air. And I can turn into a nuisance. Good evening.